Hi, long range hunting. Today I'm going to be breaking down how I do my testing and how results will either be good or they'll be bad and what I base that off of. Now this is something that comes up all the time. I've planned on doing a video on this actually for quite a while. I was in a discussion with a really nice guy from Australia named Brett about hammer bullets, and he was asking these questions based on, my findings, field results, etc. And I figured the best way to explain and show everything and break it down is just by doing a video. So it was already planned. This just kind of moved it forward. And that way, when anybody else asks, I can just send them this video and it'll break down everything with examples instead of typing a bunch. Now, let's dive into just the media real quick of what I use. I use a professional ballistic gelatin. This is from Clear Ballistics. Very good gel, very good company. Does everything I need it to do. It shows on camera really well, and their customer service is phenomenal. If you are going to buy from them, one thing I do recommend, I learned this the hard way. Places like Midway USA actually has it priced way, way higher than what it actually is. Clear Ballistics has it for much cheaper. I bought my original one from Midway, paid an arm and a leg, and then found out I could get it significantly cheaper just going through Clear Ballistics. So I order it from them. It's wonderful. I can remelt it, reuse it. You guys see that in the tests. But let's break down how I do my tests and why they're different and why I do them. Is ballistic gelatin 100% what you're going to see? No. Now, it's a controlled test that you can use. It's a consistent media that's going to give you a controlled test comparison of the differences between them. But what has been found by FBI, different bullet companies, experts, that what they're seeing in the gel from field results from both hunting and from law enforcement of gunshot wounds, etc., officer involved shootings, is that what they're seeing in the gel is showing what the type of performance you're going to get on a human or an animal actually is. Does it represent bone and everything else? No, it's not going to do that. And so there are going to be a little bit of changes in there depending on that. With humans, with law enforcement stuff, they'll actually put different pieces of material like shirts, jean material, all that, and they'll see what it does to change that projectile and how it performs. For hunting, I do it a couple ways, and the reason being is, one, to debunk some stuff, and two, to show controlled comparisons. There's a lot of people that think hide is some really thick thing that it's going to just hit and a bullet's going to blow up or massively expand. And if you look at this, every bullet that I've ever tested, and when I go in, shooting an animal, all the holes are just holes on the entrance side. Now you can have a larger exit hole, but the entrance holes, it's just going through. It's not even expanding really until it's gone through the ribs or wherever you're wanting it to go. And then that main force is being dumped into that chest cavity. So does hide help? Yes. Is there really a big difference between hides as far as big game? No. It's very minute. Now, do animals get bigger and with a lot more hair, and does it get heavier? Yes, and that's where a lot of that comes into play, but it doesn't matter how large or heavy it is. It's the depth of penetration that actually matters. Now, I do my test a couple ways. I have done just straight gel blocks. There were some issues with hide I used, so I ended up just doing a few with just gel blocks. But generally speaking, what I'm doing is I'm using real untanned deer hide. I'm using actual meat, and then I'm using the gel block. And what I'm doing is I'm cutting it specific to an animal. Now, the reason I do this is because animals are different. You have different depths of penetration, which again always matters. People always talk about weight. Weight doesn't mean anything. You're not shooting 800 pounds. You're shooting a section of an 800-pound animal. And all that matters is that impact resistance and that depth of penetration requirement. So, take a whitetail. A whitetail deer, on average, has 3 inches of depth to vitals and a vital depth of 10 inches. So realistically, all you have to do is penetrate 13 inches for good performance. Now, I know there's the guys that are going to say, oh, an exit hole, you still have to go out the other side. Exit holes are for archery and bad bullets, where you're not getting sufficient trauma in order to make that animal die quickly, and you want a blood trail and you're going to have to track it. Now, something people don't realize is that first part and then the vitals, that's all that matters. What it does on the exit side does not affect it at all. If it's going out the other side, guess what? Once it's out, it's out. But I'll dive into that in just a second with the diagrams and kind of show you guys what I'm talking about. Now, the other one I do is I actually add bones. And people have tried to say, oh, well, you know, you have it without bones, so that's not an accurate representation. It's not anatomically correct. Well, here's the thing. If you actually know anatomy and bullets, you can actually impact a deer. If you shoot it on a quartering shot and you go behind the ribs and it goes into the chest cavity, if it stops, guess what? You're not impacting any bones. You can shoot it through the ribs, and that gap in the rib and gap in the rig. I've had that happen where that bullet passes completely through without ever touching a bone. What do bones do? They increase your impact resistance. Impact resistance is going to aid in expansion. So I go for worst case scenario. When I'm trying to show the minimum amount of expansion you're going to get. So worst case scenario, you don't impact any bones. It zips through. What kind of performance can you see? And then I turn around and I do the same test. However, I add bones to it. Now, what does this do? It has a controlled test without bones and a controlled test with. And so what we can do is side by side show the difference in performance. That way we can learn what it does in worst case scenario and best case scenario. Now, there are a lot of people out there that are unqualified doing testing. They don't really know what they're doing. And what they'll do is they'll either get a ballistic gel block and they shoot it at point blank through a chronograph. You know, they're not doing slow motion, which that transfer of energy, that temporary wound cavity, guess what? You can't see that with the naked eye. It happens faster than the eye can see. You actually have to slow it down in slow motion. So understanding the permanent wound cavity is just one part of it. Is it transferring into there and what you're going to see? So if you take two bullets and one gets a larger energy transfer, you're going to see a larger temporary wound cavity. If you're getting hydraulic shock, that is going to open up that permanent wound cavity even more. If they're not doing slow motion, you're not getting all the data to see the comparison of the two and understand what it's doing. Now, one of them that absolutely drives me nuts is water jugs. Now, anybody who's ever done a belly flop will tell you water, I mean, you can go into it, sure, you can dive into it. But if anybody who's ever done cliff jumping, even with your toes pointed, you're going to feel it. When you're high enough, you're going to feel it when you go down. If you belly flop, it's like hitting concrete. And that's the thing, those projectiles hitting. Now, it's great to force expansion, especially at high velocity, and you can catch that bullet. However, that type of impact resistance is harder when you're hitting that water like that than any animal that's going to be out there. And so, you know, guys will shoot it at high velocity and they'll say, oh, well, this bullet blew up. You know, it just fragmented. And then this one, you know, penetrated a little better and held together. Well, like a solid. However, the problem is that's not what you're going to see on an animal. So doing a test like that isn't giving you any valuable data on what's actually going to happen with an animal. And it doesn't give you any data, period. Because one, unlike gel allows you to see that temporary wound cavity, that permanent wound cavity, you know, judge what the bullet's been doing. You can get measurements on how long it is, how wide it is, etc. Water doesn't give you that benefit. It does. You shoot a jug, you see an entrance hole, and some, you know, if it exits, you're going to see an exit hole. The container, depending on how much is transferred into there, is going to split or blow up. And so you don't know on an animal what the permanent wound cavity is going to be. You don't know the temporary wound cavity. You don't know the length of the permanent wound cavity, the width of the permanent wound cavity. So shooting water does not give you any valuable data to actually compare bullets. But there's people that do that, and they'll even set a piece of meat in front of it with a little bit of bone, shoot it, it goes through. Well, again, that doesn't give you anything either. You see a hole in a piece of meat, and then the bullet hits that and stops. So not only does it hit one impact resistance, then it goes through and hits another one still at high velocity. And then they try to say, oh, well, this is a good bullet, it's bad. Well, again, you're not getting any valuable data. If you look at the professionals, none of them are out there shooting water jugs. When they're doing bullet testing, they're using ballistics gel. The only valuable thing, and that was actually on hammer bullets, was a guy shot high velocity, 2,800 feet per second, through looked like a 5-gallon container of water. So, I mean, he's got probably this much to go through. And that bullet at 2,800 feet per second blew straight through. It split the sides a little bit. It didn't blow up, just opened up the sides. So the only data that I can get off that, and he said that was a good representation, and this is great for hunting. Actually, it's not. Because when you're hitting something with a bullet like that, and it blows through, or any bullet, and it blows through, now that tells me that he's got minimal expansion, and that bullet is just plowing through. Well, if it's doing on the equivalent of hitting concrete, where most bullets at that velocity would simply fragment, even the bonded bullets would come apart at that type of velocity in water, hitting straight on water, guess what? That means that that bullet isn't going to expand on an animal, and it's just going to blow right through. The only thing water really showed in any instant is that one, and it showed a lack of performance. Because if it's hitting something that hard and won't expand and slow down and dump that energy, and it'll just blow through, guess what? An animal, it's going to be even worse. Now let's dive in. A lot of people don't see the behind the scenes of these. There's a lot of logistics and work that goes into it. It's not simply throwing a gel block up and shooting it. I have tons of gear. Each one of these blocks weighs about 17 pounds. And so not only do I have to load everything, I've got to get guns, I got to do load development. If I get a bullet, I've got to do a bunch of research on it. Got to load everything up, get there, set up, shoot, reset, shoot, and go through all that, bring it back. I've got to examine everything, measure everything, get all that data, film the talking points, get it on there. And that's just once I'm good to go. That's not including the load development. When I start out, one of the first things I'm doing is getting on Berger's website. Berger has an excellent stability calculator. And so what I'm doing, if I get a projectile, the first thing I'm going to do is get on there. I'm going to look up the weight of the bullet. I'm going to input that. I'm going to input the velocity, my rifling, and I'm going to find out where I'm going to be stable at. Because again, I've got to be able to hit it. This is only 6 inches by 6 inches wide. So I'm hitting a 6-inch. I don't do it at point blank. The only time I do point blank or close is when I'm trying to achieve a really high velocity and I need to be that close to get it. Most of my shots are anywhere between 200 and 300. I have done some closer just for specific velocities, but most of the time I'm shooting further out. Now I only have those 300 yards to shoot at this current place over in Alabama. I have to drive to a different state even to go do these. And so what I'm doing is, if I need to get those lower velocities, I'm still shooting 300. I'm just doing reduced loads. Now, once I've looked it up and I know what weight will stabilize in my rifle twist and what velocity, then it comes down to either ordering them or if bolts were sent to me, it comes down to load development. Because again, it's not a big target. I've got to be able to hit it. And so what I'm going to do is take that, I'm going to do load development on it, make sure it's shooting good, it's stable, I know it's got gyroscopic stability, it's shooting and grouping well. Then it's time to chronograph. So I'm going to chronograph that load. I'm going to enter it into a ballistic calculator so I can figure out what my impact velocity is at a certain distance and what the potential energy is. Now, once I have all that, once I've got the gun shooting well with it, I know my velocity, I know my BC, everything's been trued, I've got that ballistic calculator set, that's when I start the testing. So I'm going to shoot at certain velocities depending on what I'm trying to get. I can do reduced loads and shoot to get those lower velocities, to get closer to minimum impact velocities, etc. And then I'm going to take that data. So I'm going to take that shot based on that muzzle velocity. I'm going to look and say my impact velocity is potential energy is this. And I'm going to take all that data, bullet if I've got it, I'm going to take pictures, I'm going to take video. Then I'm going to bring it back here and I'm going to slow it down. So I'm going to go and actually slow it down and watch that temporary wound cavity to see what type of energy dump I'm getting. I'm going to measure penetration, width of cavity, look at the bullet, etc., and break down all that before even filming the talking points. And so there's a lot that goes into it. I just don't grab it, throw some powder together and shoot it out. So I've got to make sure that everything is good to go and accurate in order to make those shots. Now let's dive into actual terminal ballistics and bullet construction and what makes results good and what makes them bad. Now, one of the things I'm looking at is the permanent wound cavity. Now, permanent wound cavity is what happens when that bullet goes crushing through. So it's that crushing path the bullet creates. And how large is that? Now, under 2,200 feet per second, we're going to dive into temporary wound cavities real quick. So under 2,200 feet per second, you achieve what's called hydrostatic shock. Now, everybody knows about hydrostatic shock. What it is that quick displacement. Humans and animals like deer, elk, etc. are water-based mammals, and so we have an elasticity point. What that means is we have a certain amount of stretch. So when a bullet impacts, whether it's a human or it's an animal, when it impacts, there's a quick displacement. Best way to say this is take a giant rock, go up on the high dive at a pool, drop it in the pool. You're going to see a quick displacement of water around. You're going to have air basically, and then it's going to collapse back around that rock. Larger the rock, the more displacement you get. So that's what's essentially happening. Now, under 2,200 feet per second, so you get rifles that are under that velocity or pistols, you're going to have a certain amount of displacement. And what's going to happen is that displacement is going to rupture organs. Now, our body might be elastic, or that deer's. However, organs like the heart, lungs, and liver are non-elastic, which is why that energy affects them. So if you take the skin, that might stretch and return some. However, those organs will not. So those organs are going to either get ruptured, torn, etc. If you achieve hydraulic shock, that's a whole nother ballgame. Great way to describe this is a rubber band analogy. That's what I always use. And if you take a large rubber band and you stretch it in all directions until the fibers start to break, it's structurally compromised. That's basically what's happening with hydrostatic shock under 2,200 feet per second. So basically, you're going to rupture stuff, you're going to break stuff, it's going to cause terminal trauma inside, bruising, etc. Now, over 2,200 feet per second, and here's the key, just like that rock that got dropped in, the more surface area, the more that bullet expands and hits, the more you're going to get as far as potential energy. So over 2,200 feet per second with proper performance, what's going to happen is you're going to take that same rubber band and you're going to pull it until it explodes. Basically, what's happening is that temporary wound cavity stretches beyond the elasticity point of the body. Now, effectively what you're doing is you're taking your temporary wound cavity and creating a permanent wound cavity. So with hydrostatic shock under 2,200 feet per second, what you're going to have is you're going to have a quick displacement and it's going to collapse back, and it's going to be just the permanent wound cavity left. That's usually going to be the size of the diameter of the bullet or a little bit larger. With hydraulic shock over 2,200 feet per second with performance, what's going to happen is it's going to stretch beyond the elasticity point, causing explosions of organs, tearing, etc. And when it collapses, it's going to be much larger. If you're inside the chest cavity, it's going to turn it into puree like this. It's just going to, purees, I used to call it soup, but puree is a great way to do it. You can literally just scrape it out. I've had to hose it out. It's nasty what it does, but it's effective. On ballistic gel, what you're going to see is a permanent wound cavity after that hydraulic shock that's going to be 2-3 times larger than the bullet diameter at max expansion. Hydraulic shock is by far the more fatal. So you get think about it like this. If you take an animal and you shoot it and you only achieve hydrostatic shock, your bullet doesn't open wide enough, it doesn't perform well, and so you get that temporary wound cavity and then you're left with that permanent wound cavity, the smaller one. Now, not all the organs are gone, so that animal might have a hole through its lungs, but it can still breathe. So it's going to have to keep breathing until those lungs collapse. It's going to end up going into shock and eventually bleeding out. It's a longer death that way. Does it kill pretty rapidly? Sure. Depends on how much trauma is caused. But if you get hydraulic shock, you can effectively blow up every organ. Now, that animal, if you achieve hydraulic shock, is not going anywhere. That animal, again, without vital organs pumping blood, without being able to breathe, it's not going anywhere. So it really doesn't matter if you have an exit hole. A couple of the ways I'm judging on impact velocity and how it performs. I'm looking at that temporary wound cavity to see how much energy is actually dumped into it. The more the better. I'm looking at that permanent wound cavity to see what kind of performance I'm getting. Am I achieving that hydraulic shock, or am I only achieving hydrostatic shock? Even if I'm under that 2,200 feet per second, what is that permanent wound cavity look at? How much expansion, how much trauma am I getting to kill that animal quickly? Now, another thing, and this is based off construction, is what are the limits of the bullet? Now, you have what's called a minimum impact velocity, and that is the minimum impact velocity in which that bullet will expand. Now, is minimum ideal? No. I mean, it's again the minimum amount of expansion. So you're not going to get ideal results there. But what happens is a lot of the tough bonded hunting bullets, they have an impact velocity minimum of around 2,200 feet per second. Same thing with solids, if you look at solid copper. And so those type bullets limit you on your effective range. If you're shooting up close, doesn't matter as much. I mean, you're still going to get better performance with a bullet that will open up more. But one thing I'm looking about, because again, we're geared at long range, but we shoot at every range. We shoot close range, long range, mid range. But what I'm looking at is how effective is that bullet and what is its limitations. If I have a bullet with a minimum impact velocity of 2,200 and I have another one that has 1,600, well, guess what? One is limiting me drastically on the performance and the distance, whereas the other one is giving me more distance and better performance. So I'm looking at to see, what is the range of performance going to give me? Now, another thing with this is accuracy, because accuracy is key. Shot placement kills. Not even a Magnum can make up for poor shot placement. So I'm going to look at those bullets. How are they designed? Are they aerodynamic with high BCs that are going to give me good ballistics, low drag? What's the shape of it? Is it going to keep gyroscopic stability? How does it group? Because again, accuracy, especially at long range, is key. If I have one bullet that at 1,000 yards when I'm out there training is holding 3-foot groups, and then I put another one in there and it's holding 5-inch groups, well, guess which one I'm going to say is better? It's going to be the one that shoots best. If the other one is losing gyroscopic stability because it's not aerodynamic, it doesn't do you any good at that distance. Even if you are above that minimum impact velocity, because again, certain bullets just aren't designed to stabilize and have good flight over long periods. Another thing I look at is cost. Now, I hear this all the time from guys, especially the solid crowd. Now, what will happen is I'll say, oh, you know what? This bullet performs, it's half the cost of your solid or half the cost of your hunting bonded bullet that's really expensive. What people don't realize is there is a major difference between something being quality and you paying for quality and being overpriced. I'm not going to mention the company, but I have a buddy that has a company. He basically copies what another company does and then charges 3 times more, and his product isn't as good. So the product's already expensive to begin with. So if it's already expensive at this price and he's charging 3 times more and it's not even the same quality, there's a perfect example. You have good quality that is already expensive, and then you have way overpriced stuff that doesn't even compete with it. So why is somebody going to waste money when they can get that one and it performs better? So it's one of those things that guys will try to claim, oh, well, you're just cheap. You don't care about the animal. You're just cheap and that's all you care about. No, not even close. This right here, if you want to price it out, it's a pretty penny. This gun costs more than most people's gun collections. This scope alone, a Smith & Bender, is between $3,200 and $4,000. So, you can figure out what the rest of the rifle costs, but it's one of those things that I don't mind paying for quality. I will get the best equipment I can to be as effective in the field as I can. But I will not overpay for crappy performance. A perfect example of even paying, even for bullets, this gun I plan on running ELD match. Generally speaking, it's about $40 a box, depending on what time of the year it is, with elections and etc., and all the anti-gun BS. But this gun prefers one of the most expensive match bullets out there, and that's the A-tips. They're excellent, they're accurate, but ultimately that's all that matters. Now, even the A-tips I think are a little bit overpriced, However, that's what performs best. It gives me great terminal performance, gives me great accuracy. It works phenomenally. And so I'm going to spend the money, even though, do I find it even ridiculous? Yes, but the performance is there. It's what shoots best in it. And even those are cheaper than some solids. I'm looking $72 up to about $110, depending on what bullet and cartridge it's going to be in, per 100. And there's solids that cost even more than that. There's solids that cost over $100 per 100. And they give me far inferior results than the superior results I get with these. So cost comes into play. What are the costs of it and how does it perform? Because ultimately that matters. If it performs to an incredible level, it makes it worth the money to a certain point. However, paying extra for crappy results is just insane. Now, another thing I'm looking at is design and BC. Like I talked about, those aerodynamics. What am I getting out of this projectile? Now, this has to go with, I'm going to bring up solids again because this is what kind of the topic was going on. You have limitations with solids, and it's just basic physics. A solid projectile that is solid copper needs more force because it's a harder metal to expand than a copper jacketed lead core. So those harder metals require a higher impact velocity, so it also limits you. But in order to get decent performance, you have to decrease weight and mass in order to achieve higher velocities to even get decent performance with. So not only are you limited on the weight of what you can do, which decreases that ballistic coefficient and is less aerodynamic, so it's going to bleed energy faster, you're not even getting better performance out of it. Whereas if you get like match lead core bullets like ELD match, etc., you can run the entire range. You can run the light, the medium, or the heavy and increase that BC and sectional density. And so you're not limited on what weight you can run. You can run the entire spectrum of it and get good performance. And, you know, again, changing that depending on your impact velocity and animal, you can play with it and get optimal results. But I can get this setup and kill anything in the world with this. You know, you got to look at the limitations of it. So am I limited when I look at that projectile on what I can run? And especially when we're talking the long range game, you want a high BC. You want less drag, you want less wind, less drop. Solids just don't do that. And even a lot of the quote unquote honey bullets don't. It's just design. One thing I want to look at when I do it is, I mentioned the permanent wound cavity, and that has to do with how it goes through. Is that bullet traveling straight through? Is there no good permanent wound cavity like it penciled through? Is it a nice wound cavity and it's the first part and then stops and then you just have the projectile where that energy, because the velocity was dumped too soon, or just right when it gets in there? Is it a nice long wound cavity that goes the entire length? You know, so I'm looking at those things on how that bullet performed. The penciling and what's called necking over is stuff that automatically goes with bad. So what can happen, especially with boat tail hollow points like Sierra Match King, even with lead bullets or the Lapua Sonars, is that tip is going to fill with material, whether it's clothing, whether it's hide, and it's effectively going to turn into a full metal jacket. What that's going to do is either pencil through, where it's just going to blow right through, you're not getting a good dump of energy or anything of that matter, you're not getting good permanent wound cavity, and ultimately, what do you end up with? Not a lot of trauma. Now, will it kill? Yes. That's one thing I want to talk about. People have the argument of, oh, well, it's a good bullet. I've killed 50 animals, 100 animals with it. So what? That doesn't matter. All bullets kill. Even without expansion, a bullet will kill. So the simple argument that, oh, I killed with it, that's like saying your brand new car is better than everybody else's car because it drives. Well, all brand new cars drive. That doesn't mean that yours is superior to them. You know, if you're buy a brand new Geo Metro, does that give you better performance than a Corvette brand off the line? No. That Corvette will spank you. So simply saying that, oh, it kills, doesn't mean anything. All bullets kill. Arrows kill. So it's irrelevant. What we judge on isn't whether it kills, it's how effective it is at killing. Ethics is a quick, clean kill. Performance of bullets And trauma is how that is achieved. Now, the other thing that they do, which I mentioned is called necking over, is where that projectile goes in, starts to have a displacement, and tumbles. Even penciling will have a little bit of displacement, as you saw. But what's happening is that bullet starts to get that displacement and then starts tumbling and changing directions. This is something that can happen with thin jacket boat tail hollow point lead, which has a much lower impact resistance requirement and velocity than something like a solid, like the hammer bullets. So on a bullet like hammer, where it's solid, it has nothing to weaken it, and it just has a hole drilled in it, it can do the exact same thing and is actually more prone to it, to where it's either going to go in and start tumbling through the entire thing, or it's going to start going and change directions. Now, it does give you a displacement. Is it hydrostatic shock or true hydraulic shock? No, it's not. As you can see from this one, this was with a hammer bullet, and it actually not only changed directions, but as you can see, there's no real permanent wound cavity. It looks impressive from the top, but when you look at it from the side, it's literally like you took a knife and stuck it in there. So is that going to really cause any good wounding? No. All right, guys, if you can see, I have several examples here. I'm going to give you examples of performance-wise. I'm going to use the analogy of arrows and broadheads. And the reason being, it's something a lot of people can grasp easy. It's a good concept that translates over the same type of thing. If you take arrows, arrows kill with broadheads, and what kills is cutting, blood loss. So if you take a broadhead with a 1-inch cut, so from here to here is 1 inch, you're going to shoot through an animal and you're going to have a permanent cavity there from the cutting of around 1 inch. Now, if you take an arrow like this, a broadhead, and you have 2.5 inches of cutting, well, guess what? Now this animal going through are going to cut and give you 2.5 inches of cut. So now your cavity here is 2.5 inches. So 2.5 right there, 1 inch right there. Which one is going to cause more blood loss and therefore a faster death? The larger cut. Now this is what I would describe as, this is what most hunting bullets do. You don't get as much expansion. It blows through a lot easier because of the construction, and it's just not as effective. Now if you get the good match bullets, not all, but the good ones like ELD Matchburger, hybrids, etc., what you're going to do is end up getting a larger cavity, causing more damage, and just like the arrow, it's going to die faster. Arrows do not have hydraulic shock or hydrostatic shock. They're only killing by blood loss. Bullets give you an advantage on that side. Now, an issue you can run into, and this is something that self-defense ammo is designed generally for 14 to 16 inches of penetration. What they want is full penetration and not over penetration. So they want the maximum amount of expansion without stopping too soon. And they don't want too little to where it just blows through and doesn't cause the trauma. So you want that sweet 14 to 16 inches is what they ideally look for self-defense or law enforcement. Problem with solids and bullets that don't open up much, do they retain more weight? Yes, but here's the thing. Weight retention is just a number. People tend to grasp on that and say, oh, weight retention, weight retention, weight retention, this is better. No, it's not. You can have a bullet that pencils through and has zero weight loss, and just like you saw, leaves nothing but just that simple little cavity. So, I mean, weight retention doesn't mean anything. You can have a bullet that loses half its weight and can outperform one that has 100% weight retention. Even with arrows, you can do that. So, a wider one like this is going to be wider, it's going to get more surface area, and it can actually slow down and get you less penetration. This will give you more penetration but less cutting, just like a bullet. And then you have these bad boys, mechanicals, which are the best of both worlds. What happens is when it flies, the blades are in line, it's aerodynamic. When it impacts, it's going to impact, go in, and then these blades are going to slide back and be forced open like this. And so what it allows is you good penetration, the blades opening at the correct time, and it gives you wide cutting. Now, the other thing it does is because they're 3-blade, it gives you more surface area. So this is what it looks like opening up. So now your wound is the circle around this, and you have 2-inch blades on each side. Well, now you have 6 inches of cutting surface. So not only are you getting the best of both worlds in both penetration and expansion, you're getting more surface area because of those 3 blades. So best of both worlds. So I have a dull one over here. And what that shows is these right here are kind of like the new Burger hybrids, ELD match, TMKs, etc., where you're getting good performance, good penetration, massive expansion and wounding. And this is more like what your typical hunting bullet is. It's going to open up. It's not going to be as big of a cavity. It's not going to expand as much. It tends to blow through a little bit easier. And so you're getting this type of results. Now, if you take solids, which are a harder metal, now both this and this are sharp. However, if you take this, which is dull, it's like a solid. So basically, if you took this and dulled the blade so it doesn't cut, well, guess what? Now you're not getting that cutting, and so all you're getting is the main body of the arrow itself. So you're not cutting organs as well. It can slip around the organs. Even if you do happen to penetrate like a lung, it's not going to be slicing them open like it would with a sharp blade. And so the solids being harder metal and harder to expand, you're not getting the type of ideal results. So somebody who thinks that this can beat this or even this, it's just crazy. It goes against basic physics. But that's what they like to advertise because they're trying to win people over. People don't realize that marketing is marketing. They want to say that their product is the best, that it beats everything else. Now, does that translate into real life and reality? Not always. Are there some that live up to the hype? Sure. Solids doing it? No. Now, something I want to talk about, I talk about penetration and over penetration or under. And the reason why I do these gel tests on specific depths of penetration is to show the differences between animals. It's showing that, this is only this much different, and look what it's going to do here, what it's going to do here. And like I said, if it exits out, it doesn't do anything. A white-tailed deer, you have 3 inches, 2 vitals, and a vital depth of 10 inches, so a total of 13 inches. Now, if you have a solid projectile and you shoot it through gel and it blows through 3 feet of gel, cool. But that doesn't translate to good performance because guess what? Only the first 13 inches matter. Once it gets past here, it's irrelevant. Once it exits that animal, guess what? Anything else that has passed that, it doesn't do you any good. So the only thing you need to focus on is that first 13 inches. If you're looking at an elk, guess what? You're looking at a little bit more. You're looking at 4 inches depth to vitals and 15 inches vital depth. So you're looking at a difference of only 6 inches of penetration requirement between a whitetail and an elk. It's not astronomical. So it's one of those things that if it blows through a deer and an elk and it's still got potential energy, it's not doing you any good. It's not benefiting you at all if it's just blowing through without causing sufficient trauma. Now, with bullets, this is more what the typical hunting is. So they have round noses, soft points. What they're doing is they're trying to get as much surface contact as possible in order to expand. The problem with that is, does it expand? Sure. Is it aerodynamic? No. And so what's going to happen is, as it flies through the air, not only when bullets come out, there's a little bit of a wobble and then it does what's called going to sleep. It's going to settle into that spin. Well, if that bullet isn't aerodynamic, sometimes it doesn't settle in. And if it's not aerodynamic, it's going to bleed off energy faster and it's going to lose gyroscopic stability a lot earlier. So that's going to affect how far you can shoot, even if it's not to that minimum impact velocity. If you've already lost gyroscopic stability, guess what? It's not doing anything. This is more like ELD match and bullets like it, and you're getting a more aerodynamic shape. And what you have is a thinner jacket. Inside of here, you're going to have a big cavity of where that's filling. And when you hit that ballistic tip, that polymer tip is going to be shoved back like a wedge into that cavity and forcing expansion. So it's going to penetrate really well, just like this. And then it's going to start expanding inside, get massive expansion, and give you good performance. Here's a solid. The problem with these is they tend to, like they said, the 14 to 16 inches, they over penetrate. Why? Because them being a harder metal, generally only the first quarter actually expands. And then you have this big old piece in the back. And so you have great weight retention and it pencils through. But the problem is you're not getting that energy transfer. You're not getting that wide wounding. And so you're not getting as much killing effect as you could with a different projectile. There are some where these will fragment off, and even the ones that aren't designed for that with a high enough impact velocity, they can fragment off. But what's going to happen is you're going to get over penetration. And again, it doesn't matter if you can penetrate 8 feet of an animal. It doesn't matter, because ultimately, unless you find an animal to where going to the vitals is 8 feet deep, it doesn't do you any good. It's going to blow through. You're going to get minimal performance, and that animal is going to not expire as quickly. Now, if you take a bullet like ELD Match, Burger Hybrids, you have a wider expansion because, again, it's a softer material. Now, that translates into a wider permanent wound cavity, more transfer of energy. Now, something a lot of people don't realize, and they'll say, oh, well, that bullet lost 50% of its weight. That's not a bad thing. The problem with a solid like this, if you open up that solid as wide as you do here, just like this, you're not going to get the same type of penetration. You're going to stop early. So if you got a solid that's a harder metal and you got it to open up really wide, you're going to get shallow penetration. Are you going to get a better energy transfer? Sure. However, you're not going to possibly get the required penetration that you need. The way that bullets like this actually do is because some people call it fragmenting or they blow up. They don't. What's happening is that bullet starting here is starting to expand, and it's going to expand. If it's too high of a velocity, it's going to run out of bullet. It's going to expand all the way. But again, then you're getting every bit of potential energy that bullet has. If it doesn't, it's going to expand and it's going to go wide. But what's going to happen is these tips, as it expands and gets to a point, that's the weakest point. Those pieces are going to break off. So those pieces, because it hasn't met, it's an object in motion. And until it meets an unstoppable force, it's not going to stop. So these pieces are going to break off the tips of that expansion, and they are going to go off, causing their own permanent wound cavities. So now you have multiple projectiles. So what happens is with this is it's going to expand wide. You're going to get that massive dump. These are going to break off, and right as they break off, it's narrowing that bullet, giving you a little bit more penetration, and that bullet's expanding, breaks off. And so it keeps doing that. And so, yeah, are you shedding some weight? Yes, but you're getting really good transfer of energy in wide permanent wound cavity. And so it allows you to get that depth of penetration you need and give good expansion. Now I'm going to break this into 2 parts just because of how long this is taking to break everything down into examples and everything and give you an in-depth look into what I do. Part 2 is going to be specific to hammer bullets, just because, again, this is a topic. I've done a review of them, field results and that. I don't want to call them fanboys, but they're kind of like the 6.5 Creedmoor crowd they think it's the best thing in the world. And in reality, all 6.5s shoot the same bullet. The cartridge is irrelevant. All that does is give you a vessel that gives you velocity. If you take 4 different 6.5 cartridges, you take the same bullet and run it at the same velocity, guess what? You're getting the exact same drop, the exact same wind, and the exact same terminal performance on impact velocity. So it doesn't give you any advantage being a 6.5 Creedmoor or 6.5 PRC if you're running at the same velocity. All that one does over the other is give you a little bit more velocity or less. But the bullet dictates how that bullet flies through the air, the drag, and it determines the terminal performance. So the whole, argument of that, it doesn't really mean anything. So it's kind of the same thing, though. They think that it's somehow superior to everything, even though that goes against every bit of knowledge out there on the subject and reality of the science of it. And so guys get this illusion that their solid is the best and it can beat a, lead core bullet. No. We're talking basic physics, so I'm going to dive into that and go into the stuff, both the testing, the field results, and why I came to the conclusion of what I did and why that is supported.
Not that hard, people.
Hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video, and happy hunting.